Hi, and welcome to this edition of Brute for Change. I'm Karan Mehta, venture principal here at Green Frontier Capital. We're a climate-focused venture capital fund, and today uh, we have with us a pretty visionary founder. We have Anand, who is the co-founder of a brilliant brand in the plant-based food space called Shaka Harry. The company is actually called Liberate Foods. But Shaka Hari is one of the leading brands for plant-based food products in the country. Anand, really lovely to have you over here, and thank you for taking the time out to talk to us. Uh, Before I actually say too much more about you, I would love to hand over the mic to you and please introduce yourself. Why did you start Shakahari? What was your motivation? And just talk about your professional journey like as well.
Hey, thanks, Karan, for having me today. It's absolute pleasure getting on this and talking to you about what we're building at Shaka Harry. I've been an entrepreneur for a while now. This is my fourth venture. My first one was in education almost 2 decades ago. We built the first online education portal, taking corporate education market to the digital world. Right, so this is back in the day when people used to fly in, go into classrooms and get trained. We started building online solutions. We built a fabulous business at the back of that scaled to run in about 9 countries around, delivered over 6 million hours of content in 150 countries with customers. In 2012-13, I handed that over to a long-standing team of mine and got more interested in the sustainability space. I started looking at that fundamentally to say how we could start impacting consumption from a commercial standpoint rather than a philanthropic standpoint, which is where I thought sustainability is going to be driven. So my first business in sustainability was in energy. This was in 2012-13, before solar got the highlight that it did. We set up a solar business called Dexler Energy. I scaled that business over the next few years. We developed a little over $100 million worth of assets in that space. And just pre-pandemic, I handed that over again to a team that was with me from day one. My co-founder was there. And I set up a venture studio to basically curate and incubate ideas around sustainability and education, the two spaces that we knew really well. And the next 2-3 years, we looked at a bunch of ideas through COVID, through the pandemic. We looked at a bunch of ideas around agtech, fintech, and food was something that I thought was personally a very, very interesting space for me. And that's how Liberate Foods was born, primarily to think of the confluence of sustainability, think about changing consumer behavior, and running a consumer brand. I'm a born and raised vegetarian. I've been a vegetarian all my life, and my first tryst with plant-based meats, or what used to be called mock meat, in Southeast Asia was about maybe 10-12 years ago. And I was always intrigued about how that transitions from a more Eastern or Western cuisine to an Indian cuisine in terms of, like, how do you start thinking of kebabs? How do you start thinking about your quintessential butter chicken or your chicken 65, and how do those move? I was sitting on that idea for a while, and through the pandemic, I got a fabulous opportunity to come in and start Liberate with my co-founder Sandeep Devgan. And a year and a half later, we're here. We're happy to be talking about what we're building.
That's so interesting, and we unfortunately don't have Sandeep over here, but I would love to also hear about his background because I know he also comes from the food tech space. So if you could maybe just introduce Sandeep, and why is he also a very critical element to the Shakahari story?
So Sandeep Devgan runs India Taste and Flavor Solution, a company called Stonefield Flavors. They are a B2B provider. They do everything from beverages, performance beverages, alcobev, confectionery, savories, and a whole variety of product dev. So typically B2B companies and FMCG companies go to Stonefield and say, hey, we have a concept for a biscuit, for a chocolate, for food, for a beverage drink, and we want you to come in and develop that entire concept for us. All the way from concept stage through till commercial availability, bringing in food science, bringing in flavor and taste solutions that are unique to what they build, is what Stonefield Flavor does. And that's actually the reason why we are in this business, right? I mean, Sandeep and I had a chat about plant protein and plant-based meats way back in during the pandemic, and I ended up visiting his office to understand a little bit more about what they do. And that was literally our first meeting. And we walked out of that room having drawn up a cap table saying, "Hey, I think this is a business we should start." Because we fundamentally realized that to what Stonefield does, we had a unique right to play this game, which is to be able to bring R&D and tech in-house. And we've consistently stayed true to that in the last couple of years, and we'll be happy to double click on that in talking about how much tech we really have in-house today in
Yep.
what we build.
Nice. So, so one of the critical factors, of course, in your business, and I would like we'll get into that, is uh firstly plant-based. You're trying to mimic taste, texture, profiles of a meat product which has natural sort of flavors within it, which gives it that sort of meaty, sort of that umami-ness that you generally like associate with meat, right? So two sort of questions on this space. One is India, predominantly vegetarian market, plant-based mock meat, etc. What is your take in terms of market potential for businesses or just for your product for that matter in a country like India, which is, predominantly vegetarian and not too many meat eaters?
So I think one of the early days when we started looking at data point versus stereotypes and what we think and consider markets, right? The first piece of data that we stumbled upon was the fact of, that debunks the whole concept of saying India is predominantly a vegetarian country. It's not. 70% of our population are non-vegetarians, people who are meat-eating populations. And it's even more interesting when you start looking at state-wise data in terms of how you start looking at it at food and consumption pattern, right? I mean, you traditionally imagine North Indians being, more meat eaters and South Indians being, more vegetarian. And the data proves that it's actually quite opposite, right? In terms of saying that you have in excess of a 90% meat-eating population in Tamil Nadu, and you have a predominantly vegetarian population in Punjab, which is not what you would have inherently thought about when you start thinking about food, right? I mean, you're saying, hey, listen, up north is where you get the butter chicken, down south is where you get rice-based dishes, so maybe this is how it's going to be. But that was just some data, right? But when you start looking at animals in the entire food ecosystem in terms of what it means, fundamentally, there's a trend that's happened over the last probably even century and a half, is as per capita income starts going up, people's requirement to have better and higher quality sources of protein improves, and therefore meat consumption goes up. Right? So there is a direct correlation to saying incomes, and you could think about this in families that you're familiar with, or families of friends that you know, who probably grew up having meat maybe once a month, maybe once every other month, maybe on a special occasion, it was a big deal. On a Sunday, they come in and have meat, but those same families would be consuming meat between 4 and 6 times a week right now. So what's happened over the last 2.5 decades is the meat consumption has started going up, right? And when we start following that from a sustainability standpoint, or from a consumption standpoint, from a health standpoint, we start understanding what really drives consumer behavior, and can we start providing alternates to these consumers, is I think one of the segments that we look at. The second point that you look there is saying how, as Indians, we look at food, and then how we look at meat. There's a whole different connotation to the way we understand meat and animals and food, right? I mean, most meat eaters would still abstain from meat, on religious days, on, 1 day of the week or 2 days of the week, or maybe complete festive periods. There may be periods that they don't consider to be appropriate for them to be consuming meat. So we have a very Indian context relationship to meat, which is very, very different to how we look at it from the US or the Western markets. And I think understanding that has been critical for us in terms of how Shaka Harry goes out and has that conversation with consumers, is an understanding that Indian context and how meat reflects in our societies right now.
I like that you made that nuanced difference, because you're absolutely right when you say, and this was something that I've noticed tracking the sector for a long time, is that what I like to say is that we have a lot of closeted non-vegetarians. So people who eat meat are not open like about it. So they probably like identify more with vegetarianism, but they are like the people who eat meat on a weekend or when they're out with friends having a drink or something like that. More social, right? They would enjoy it and not cook it in their homes, but they would still identify as vegetarian. So you're absolutely right. There's actually like a little bit of digressness in the data in itself, specifically to the idea that you said that that India is different. How are you positioning Shaka Harry and your product portfolio specifically to cater to that sort of differentness that you have identified in the Indian demographic?
Oh, in lots of ways, right? And I think that was a part of our identity that we kept upfront, right? Saying Shakari is a plant-based brand for the Indian cuisine and the Indian consumer. Fundamentally, I think the difference starts from the way we look at our cuisine, right? The way meat is consumed in the Indian context is very, very different from the way meat is consumed in an international cuisine, right? If you look at what center of plate versus what side of plate versus how meat is served, how is it seasoned, how is it flavored. It's very, very different. And the way the Indian palate actually accepts meat is you need it with all those other embellishments that come on top of it for it to be a full-fledged dish for someone to have. But for you to go to the West and say, hey, listen, I'm going to have a steak in a medium rare or rare, is perfectly okay for you to say that it's less seasoned, if you may, in that sense, right? So I think the first thing for us to understand is how do we look at the cuisine itself. The second is sounds very generic and quite intuitive in that sense, but I think a lot of companies miss it, is fundamentally you need a very tasty product. Right? I mean, if I'm going to give you something that tastes like a keema samosa, you need to be able to taste a keema samosa, right? Now, I cannot come in and start telling you, hey, imagine a keema samosa, have this product, and then imagine cleaner heart, lesser calories, no animal cruelty, better carbon footprint, and therefore hence make compromises on fundamental taste. Right? Consumers don't do that. Because fundamentally, if you've already anchored on saying, hey, listen, I'm going to deliver a keema samosa to you, that's exactly what they're expecting that they're going to be eating is a keema samosa. At that point, they're not looking at how one plant protein is better than animal protein. They're not considering anything else. They're just comparing you on taste to taste basis. So I think those are a couple of key areas that we've been true to it as a brand, stay true to our Indianness in that sense, and said that this is the strength that we have and this is the strength that we want to have. And you'd see that even in something like our momos, right, is probably a little more from Southeast Asia or Far East. But you have an Indianized version of it that comes in, and that's where you'd see in our cuisine, you'd see a Haryali momo or an Achari momo or a Tikka momo, right, which is more Indianized in terms of ensuring that we stay true to the cuisine that we want to represent.
No, that's just on that point, right? So one of the biggest things, and just a disclaimer, I'm a huge fan of your keema samosas. It is like a party snack that I have in my freezer all the time. When friends come over, it's the easiest thing that I can make and serve to them. Like I also have like a lot of non-vegetarian friends. So I actually did this once when I did like a blind tasting. And I just told them that, listen, like I've got these really great keema samosas. Do you want to try them out? And I made them, and no one even knew that it was plant-based. And like, of course, like when I told them that it's plant-based, they cursed me, uh, but I had a little laugh at the back, right? So I was really happy. I was like, okay, the product actually works. Uh, but just on that point, right? One of the things that I've actually seen consumers say is that, oh, this is soya. Soya is not good for you. And there has been an evolution in terms of just the processing of protein from plants, and now it's just not soya. There are multiple like other sources that you actually use. So can you talk to me about that a little bit in terms of how do you get those sort of barriers? How do you get consumers to cross those sort of barriers who have these preconceived notions that, listen, plant-based, soya, GMO, not good for you, all these issues that potentially come with it?
Hey, so okay, so let's look at it again from two angles, right? First, from a product hygiene cleanliness standpoint, right? We're non-GMO, We have no preservatives, right? Because it's completely frozen, still gets you long shelf life from there. In terms of processed food, I think it's a term that's probably less understood in terms of what processing is, right? Almost every single product that we have today is processed food. And then people come in and say, oh, but this is more processed than that. There isn't really a sense of more or less processed. The starting point for all plant protein brands is a protein extract, right? Now, this protein is extracted like any other protein product that you would have. It's absolutely no different. Till this point in time, it's absolutely no different. In terms of what is the source of protein, it could be soy, it could be pea, it could be mushrooms. We use a whole combination of products to come in and give you. You also have rice, you have potato, you have a whole bunch of products that come in and give you from where protein can be extracted. And then you have different taste profiles, different texture profiles that will come in basis the protein sources that you're fundamentally using. Now, up to this point, it's the same thing, right? So any protein product that you have, any product that comes in and says, hey, I've got 15 grams, 16 grams, 22 grams, 24 grams of protein, that's plant-based, has got the exact same protein source and the method that it comes into here. What happens from here is basically that these proteins get texturized. The process of texturization is basically water, heat, and pressure, right? It goes through a twin screw extruder, you put it through a machine, you put water, you put heat, you give it a lot of pressure, and it basically extrudes it. Now, it's incidentally the similar machine that's going to start making pastas for you, right? Which is how you take normal flour and you start making pastas. You have an extruded product that comes out of it, and then that extruded product gets seasoned and made into a product and served, right? So that's the basic process. So the process in its individual parts, if you start looking at it, the main process of where we start from is when an extruded product comes to us and we start making an end product from there, right? Which is basically a texturized protein that we start with. That's the fundamental part of where the business is, right? Now, a lot of people start looking at this to say, hey, I don't understand it, so there should probably be something wrong with it.
Yeah.
But there's been a lot of technology progress that's happening. People had concerns around sodium levels. People had concerns around multiple options that came in. And these have subsequently been proven saying that, hey, listen, the fundamentally products coming out of here are not significantly different in terms of their original product of what you'd have from a meat-based source, right? So is it processed? Yes, this is how it's processed. This is how all processed food goes out and starts coming in. But I think the important thing for us to understand is plants as a source of protein itself, right? I mean, the animals that people consume in their food are fundamentally herbivorous animals, which means that these animals go out and eat these exact same plants, which is soy, corn, pea,
Exactly. Yeah.
potatoes, right? Process that plant and therefore hence produce protein, right? Now, protein is not generated by, let's say, like how leaves do it. It's not from sunlight. It's not through photosynthesis that they come in and say, oh, I've generated protein. They consume a plant and then they have protein, and then we're going in and we're slaughtering that animal to basically have protein at the end of it. So if you basically look at that, what we're doing is we're having a middleman that takes and extracts protein from this plant, and then we're consuming that source that has converted this plant into a protein source and coming in, which is why we fundamentally at Shaka Harry look at it and say, we are not alt protein, but we are actually OG protein. So we are the original source of protein. The animals that you eat fundamentally get their protein from the same plants that we're using. So soy is a huge source of animal feed that goes into animals, right? So people's concerns kind of get a little skewed when you start looking at the real data and saying the animals that you're having in the first place are fed with soy, which is their source of protein, which is the exact source of protein that we're using. It starts getting a little clearer for them.
Yeah. Nope. That's so true. And like, I guess on that note, like, I just want to shift gears a little bit and talk about more in terms of like technologies and stuff that we could see potentially happen in the space. In India, at least, we saw initial vegetarian protein variants in terms of soy chunks, etc., that vegetarians would traditionally add to their food, like add to their biryani or add to the dals or add to the sabjis that they would have, just to add a little bit like of protein. Today, now we've got food tech that has created OG proteins or alternatives, like you like to, which is more commonly known, to traditional meat products. What is the future sort of unfold for this space in terms of, we've got so many pathways that are being built up and so early. So what are the sort of ways that you think that this can move forward from here in terms of just an industry, and even for you, for Shaka Hari? And can you talk a little bit about that, and we can get into a few more
Oh,
questions?
absolutely, absolutely, right. So I mean, see, fundamentally at Shaka Harry, we are a core food tech company with a brand, right? Which is quite significantly different from brands that are just going out there and selling products. And the reason we make the distinction important is because in the plant protein space, we're the only company that does our R&D completely in-house, right? Everything from protein sources all the way to flavor and taste solutions, to seasoning and finishes. The entire stack is done in-house for us, and that we think gives us a very, very distinct advantage over consumer preferences in terms of what the consumer requires, and over any competing brands that come into this space. And we've been extremely deliberate about ensuring that we focus on the various aspects of technology over here. And now, if you break that up, it breaks up into 3 or 4 broad segments. One is the source of protein. We'll talk about that in just a minute. The second is in terms of a masking flavor, because the base protein that you use will give you the taste of the original protein source. So something from soy or pea or mushroom would give you a taste of soy, pea, or mushroom, or rice or potato would be likewise rice or potato. How do you taste it? How do you mask it? How do you give it a flavoring solution? That's very, very core to where we are, which is why our keema samosas or our chicken nuggets, for the matter, do as well as they do, is because that technology taste solution is in-house. Then you have a seasoning and finish that comes in at the base of it. Now, in the step 0 over here is typically talking about where you get your protein sources from, right? And there are 3 broad segments in the world that you look at. One is plant-based, which is what we're currently doing. The second is precision fermentation, and the third is an upcoming technology in terms of lab-grown meat, right? Which is animal-free, grown in a lab, grown out of a cell. In a couple of months from now, we'd be the only company in India that has all 3 of these technology suites in-house and completely integrated from brand to technology, completely in-house, right? We already have some work that's happened on our fermentation line. Our products are under testing right now. And we have something really exciting coming up on the lab-grown space of it that we believe we'd be quite ahead in that race in a couple of months from now. And we think that, our current progress over there will ensure that we have a commercially viable, available product in about 18 to 24 months.
Wow, that's interesting. So you're actually moving to the next phase while building up the existing sort of product lines and preparing for that transition to like newer protein sources using precision fermentation and cell-based meat technologies.
Yes, these are fundamentally technologies. We believe that our differentiation and our moat in this market is going to continue to remain taste solutions.
Correct.
Taste being a coefficient of also texture that you're able to have, and innovation in terms of protein sources that you're going to have, right? And we had the bandwidth to be able to come in and do this in terms of have these technologies worked on in-house, and we have clear line of sight right now to be able to declare very soon that we'd have all 3 of these technology stacks completely in-house.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And like, look, that's super exciting to see an Indian company actually building out these future ready technologies that could potentially potentially eliminate like animals from our diet completely. So very excited to see, and potentially also taste those products as soon as they come out. To just talk to me about, just like, to switch gears a little bit, just talk to me about how fundraising for your business per se has been. I know you've raised like a few rounds like of funding, and you've got one celebrity, like, of course, who's also like invested like in your business. So would love to hear about how you have seen the whole fundraise process for a business like yours, given that climate investments today is becoming so mainstream, and you're sort of right there in the thick of it.
See, fundraising, I think the market's been interesting, right? So we started just before the market turned, right? But then again, there are a couple of unique opportunities that we provide our investors coming in. right? Our entire team is made up of multi-time successful founders who have scaled businesses, who have a track record of scaling businesses extremely efficiently, if I may say so, right? I mean, the first two out of my four businesses were completely bootstrapped in-house without any line of external funding. The second one that we look at is in terms of saying that I think timing is also of extreme importance, right? When we started, I think we were the second or third company in the space to come in, right? We did have, off the bat, we did have a differentiated product that stood out in the market space that investors were able to come in and say, okay, listen, between product A and product B, we fundamentally think the product B is better. For them to be able to come in and say, okay, if you're saying you've got tech, we can actually taste that tech in every product that comes out. That was an interesting move for us. From there, it's been a lot of serendipity also in terms of for us to find all the right partners that we've been able to onboard. We've been extremely at the right place at the right time, if I may say so. When we decided to, when we reached out through a network of mine, I just cold called a network of mine and said, guys, I think we have a great brand, we have a great product, our category needs someone like Mahi to come in and start looking at what we're doing. Is there a method for me to reach out and talk to them? And someone within a minute or two sent me a number and said, hey, listen, here's the number of his guy. Why don't you give them a shout and let them know what's happening? 10 minutes later, I was on a call with the gentleman from Mahi's office. And he was excited about what we spoke, right? And he said, hey, listen, I have someone coming to Bangalore. They're going to be there in the next 48 hours. Why don't you pick up the phone and talk to them? Spoke to the person who was moving into Bangalore, who knew the sector inherently well, right? And off the bat, you're like, okay, how are you different from company A, B, and C?
Yeah.
What are you doing here? What are you doing? So they knew this sector. They were looking for opportunities in the sector. And it ended up being a very quick conversation from there in terms of proving that we were different and investable. And I think that's how our entire fundraise process has been going. We're in between around right now. The markets have been what the markets have been, but then it's interesting because fundamentally, I think now the quality of conversations that we end up having with investors is more aligned to saying, hey, how do we think of growth and sustainable growth rather than saying, okay, how do we just go from fundraise to fundraise with vanity numbers going up? And I think these are more real conversations that really suit entrepreneurs of my genre a little more in terms of understanding how we fundamentally build successful businesses.
No, absolutely. So I think, which is something which I've also noticed, right? We went through a phase where I think like liquidity just like drove craziness, and it was essentially, like you said, fundraise to fundraise, and businesses were not being built on fundamentals. Now I think there's a semblance of sensibility that's set in, and people are asking the right questions. Is that something that you feel like as well? Are investors today who you're talking to, and you said you're in the middle like of a fundraise, are they asking you the right questions in terms of like, look, we know what you're doing and we believe that we could be the right partner for you, and this is the vision that we also have for your business? Are you sort of seeing that?
Yes, we are. And I think that's an interesting conversation to have, right? And again, when people talk about the days of the past from a year and a half ago, we say that it's craziness. And I say, it's a different context, it's a different world. And, you needed that kind of investment to build those kind of businesses. But at the end of the day, we're building a CPG, FMCG food brand, right? I mean, the climate side of it, the unique category of it, all are good. But then we will and we must fundamentally build a very, very strong food company. And that's how we're going to be evaluated, right? People are going to come in and say, okay, show me base metrics that are going to stand up as any other food metric. And I think those are the kind of conversations that we're having with investors right now. And it's an absolutely enjoyable journey.
That's awesome. And you've got two really hard hitting like investors in the space, like already like on your cap table, apart from Mahi, of course, but you've got Better Bite Ventures and you've got Blue Horizon, who are known for making really great investments in the plant-based and alternative like protein sphere. How has it been with them being on your cap table as well?
Oh, it's been lovely, right? And to us, that was the first indication of saying that we're doing something right. Right? I mean, obviously there were customer traction. There were people who were coming in, giving us phone calls and saying, great product. How do we get involved? How do we participate with the company? But then when you start looking at people who are focused on this sector, coming in and saying, hey, listen, and for both of these companies, we were their first Indian investment, right? Both of these companies had been looking at India for a while. They evaluated opportunities and said, okay, which part of the spectrum do we go to? Ingredient suppliers, do we go to brands, do we go to B2B players? Where do we play this game? They fundamentally back to us. And that to me says that, hey, listen, we're getting something right. Right? And we're getting the confidence of international investor coming in to an Indian market with the first check that they're writing is in a company like us, right? Which was actually quite exciting. And it puts us in the room with a whole load of super innovative entrepreneurs, right? I mean, I'm meeting a bunch of the portfolio companies next week, and you have people who are doing precision fermentation for fats, right?
Wow.
You have people who
Yeah.
are doing precision fermentation for, something that's going to give you a mouth feel of the skin of a chicken, right? I mean, it's so exciting to sit in those rooms and say, hey, where are you guys pushing the boundaries in terms of food tech, and what of that can I tap in and bring back into our portfolio, and that we can start serving the Indian consumer with that.
And I really like that you're talking about this because it is not as simple as just putting together a protein and a flavor and a masker. There is a lot of food tech and science involved. Even in the plant-based products that you guys have, there is a lot of thought. There's a lot of pushing the boundaries in terms of what it takes to actually create like a product, create that mouthfeel, and create and mimic what a meat would taste like with plants. So I'm really great. I'm really happy that you're debunking so many of the stereotypes over here. But yeah. So the other thing that I want to talk about, make in India, right? How is this sector in from your perspective? How is it being seen globally? Is India being seen as like a as like a factory for the next wave of food tech? Because we've been doing this also for so long. So so how are you sort of you like of course like travel quite a bit and meet people. So how have your interactions like abroad been, and how are they perceiving like India for this space?
It's again in India we have two advantages, right? Specifically talking about the sector that we can import and export to these, right? A lot of the key markets we're talking to also have a consumer base that has left from here between anywhere from 2 years to 25 or 30 years ago, right? Which means that you have a large Indian ethnic or South Asian diaspora that basically has an affinity to the kind of product line we're talking about, right? We're doing extremely well in export markets. It's very, very early days, but very promising, right? We're there in Singapore. We have launched in Qatar. We are launching in Dubai later this month. We're launching in the US by Diwali. Now, all of these markets, people are like, oh, are you going to mainland? Are you going to... But the first port of call for us is just people coming in saying, oh, wow, this reminds me of keema from home. This reminds me of biryani from home. And I can now have this in my house, right? Because in a lot of these countries, you're not allowed to export Indian meat, right? For them to be able to enjoy Indian dishes is something that's not something that's available to them very easily. And therefore, hence, we already have a consumer base. Um, in the larger scope of things, export revenues are extremely exciting for us, right? The benefits given by the government in terms of promoting Make in India, promoting exports, promoting participation in even events or events that are going to drive export orders coming in is super exciting for us. Initial days we're looking at it, I think we're going to have an extremely healthy export business as a part of Shaka Harry going forward.
So the export business will grow with two things, like you said. So it is one got to do with the diaspora, the flavors, the products that you all have catering to the Indian South Asian sort of the Indian South Asian palate. That's one. Two is it's also cost, right? So how would you all compare in terms of cost on a shelf compared to, because these are Singapore, Dubai, or US, these are mature markets for plant-based protein. How do you guys compare when you're on the shelf with a say with a Just or with the other behemoths who are there like a Beyond and all these guys, and you'll share the same shelf space as them?
So the way we look at pricing here, Karan, is not about saying how do we compare with the next meat alternate company, right? I don't think competition is there
Okay.
because the consumer is not coming in and saying, okay, do I go to product A or product B or do I go to Shaka? The consumer is coming in and saying, hey, do I buy meat or do I buy this? or do I buy something else, right? It could be something completely different. And you're really competing for that occasion on that day, right? It could be breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks. It could be a party entree. It could be a main course. It could be what's going to be plated for a family dinner, date night, or what have you. Now, the way we look at pricing, and interestingly, it's not just abroad, right? In India, 6 out of our 14 products right now have parity with the meat products, right? We've been able to meet parity on that because we've been able to do a lot of advancement again from a technology standpoint, being able to rationalize costs, bring production and manufacturing in-house, being able to drive efficiencies there, and say that, hey, listen, our momos today are just like chicken momos are the exact same price as a chicken momo that you find on shelf. And I think that's an important step for us to have. Because again, we're going back to the thesis that says consumers are not going to make compromises for us saying, oh, your product is inherently better for the planet, better for me, but I'm now going to compromise on taste, texture, or price, and I'm going to pay you more for a product that's maybe 50%, 60% of what I think it should be, only because it's a better product for the planet. And that's where we've been focused, saying, how do we bring price and performance to where the current products are? And I think we'll continue to do that.
That's brilliant. Um, Anand, just a few last concluding questions. You know, I like to ask founders this, or I like to ask people who I host on this podcast this, that, who are your sort of, who are your people, or the people who you like to look up to, or who are your role models, right? So, and I've got really varying answers. So I'm asking you the same question. Who are your role models? Who do you want to sort of like emulate?
Well, I've been doing this for a while, Karan. So I think my role models have also grown over a period of time, right?
Of
But
course, yeah.
but as a kid straight out of college, when I was thinking of my first business, way before being an entrepreneur was being cool in Bangalore, right? The one person that I did absolutely look up to was Mr. Narayan Murthy, right? In terms of how he managed to build not just a company for himself, but change the narrative of an entire city, of a state, and eventually of a nation in terms of how our identity has moved over the last 2 decades. That can be traced back to what he's done, right? It's not about being revolutionary as an entrepreneur, but being able to impact that lives. I've been a super big fan of his right through, and I continue to remain awed by what he does, or what he's managed to do. Over the last few years, there have been some fantastic entrepreneurs that we can go and pick and choose from. Richard Branson coming in and doing this across multiple sectors. When I think about my journey and saying, okay, we did energy, we're now in food, right? I have done something with education. I like to look at it and say, okay, what are the kind of lessons that I could learn from building across categories from where and what he does. But then obviously the newest of the newest crops, right? I mean, you've got to love what Elon Musk does.
Yeah.
Fundamentally rethink the way people think about most basic assumptions of what we have. You and I are here talking about food, but he comes in and says, hey, listen, do you need to even be living on earth, right? And I think that just is an extremely entrepreneurial mindset to come in and say, let's go to the most basic assumption that you make and challenge it and see if that can be changed. And I'm inspired by these guys.
That's amazing. And let me also tell you, the most common answer that I've seen, like in terms of role models, has been Elon Musk.
And rightfully, I mean, I think his shadow falls large on entrepreneurs of our age. I mean, it does.
No, he does. Well, not just your age, uh, people who are much younger, which is again my next question and my last question, people who are younger wanting to create, and I'm loving seeing the ecosystem of just startup founders, people in their 20s and 30s really coming up with some fabulous ideas, so young in their lives. What you being a seasoned entrepreneur, done 4 businesses, ran a venture studio, so what are the sort of advice or pointers that you would probably give them, top 2, 3 things that they should just probably do to build a successful company for themselves, or just build a successful career for themselves?
I look at advice that I give myself, right? Honestly. And I mean, I'm not sure I really want to sit at the table and give. I mean, a lot of these young kids are building fabulous businesses that I'm in awe of, right? In terms of how they're thinking about how they're building scale rapidly is, I think, quite exciting to see. Now, fundamentally for me, I think the one thing that I would say which holds louder today than probably a couple of years ago is any redefinition of what fundamental performance of a business is gets debunked over a period of time, which means to say that we really cannot forget the basics of saying, hey, what's revenue, what's margins, what's profitability, what's EBITDA, and what's free cash that you're generating at the end of the day, right? And if we try to start putting different terminologies, different facades around it, different names, different wrappers around it, I think those will go out of fashion very, very fast, right? And fundamentally, I think over a period of, if you look at a 5, 10, 15, 20-year period, I think businesses that have those, what we now keep calling business fundamentals, the more we build with business fundamentals in mind and saying, hey, growth minus of anything else, I think is going to be a shorter lived flavor. Anyone who's building a business, we need to focus on these 4-5 metrics. We keep our fundamentals clean. Markets could be how it is. You'd still have a business, you'll have fun running.
Yeah, no, I love that piece of advice because I totally agree with it. I totally understand. And businesses that are built, and look at the businesses that have actually lasted the test of time, the largest business houses, right? It was always about revenues, cash flow, margins, and if you build a business like on fundamentals, your business lasts the test of time. So Anand, with that, thank you so much. This was super like insightful. Thank you for being part of the podcast, and look forward to more interactions with you. We hopefully will catch up soon, but no, like really like appreciate you being here.
Hey, thanks, Karan. Pleasure talking to you today.